The street was unusually silent when I arrived at my sister's house that afternoon. The wind rustled through the trees, and the faint creak of the old front gate echoed in the emptiness. I rang the bell once, then again, no answer. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. My stomach twisted with unease. She always told me if she was going somewhere, especially when I was visiting. I looked through the window. Her bag was on the couch, her keys still hanging by the door. Something was wrong. Just as I was about to leave, I heard footsteps. Hurried, panicked footsteps, followed by a desperate voice calling my name. I turned to see the neighbor's housemaid sprinting toward me, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Don't go inside," she screamed, grabbing my arm with trembling hands. "Something terrible happened last night." Her words froze me in place. "What are you talking about?" I asked, but she only shook her head, sobbing uncontrollably. "They took her," she whispered, barely audible. "Your sister." She was screaming for help. The world spun around me. My sister was gone. But who took her? And why had no one told me anything? The maid looked around nervously, as if afraid someone might be watching. "They'll come back," she muttered. "They always do." A chill crawled down my spine. Suddenly, the silence of the street didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a warning. Something dark was hidden behind these quiet houses, and I was about to uncover it. The afternoon sun hung low behind a thin veil of clouds as I turned onto my sister's street. The neighborhood was the same as I remembered. Quiet, tree-lined, and comfortably ordinary. Children's bicycles leaned against gates, and the faint sound of a barking dog echoed from somewhere nearby. Yet that day something felt off. It wasn't just the emptiness of the street. It was the silence, too deep, too still, as if the entire place was holding its breath. I parked my car in front of her small brick house, the one with the blue shutters she loved so much. My sister, Alina, always kept her garden neat, but today the flowers looked wilted, the soil dry, and a thin layer of dust coated her porch. I frowned. She never let things go untidy, not even for a day. I rang the doorbell once, then again. No answer. I knocked harder, calling her name. Still nothing. A strange unease began to coil in my stomach. Alina knew I was coming. She'd texted me just last night. "Come around 3 p.m. I have something important to tell you." I checked my watch, 3:05. Maybe she'd gone to the store. But then why was her car still in the driveway? I tried calling her phone. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. I peered through the front window, cupping my hands against the glass. The curtains were half drawn, but I could make out the shape of her handbag sitting on the couch, her keys still hanging on the hook by the door. My pulse quickened. If she wasn't home, she hadn't gone far. But why would she leave everything behind? I hesitated, debating whether to wait or call someone. Then I noticed something odd. The front door wasn't completely closed. It was slightly ajar, just enough for a sliver of shadow to peek through. My first instinct was to push it open, but a whisper of fear held me back. What if someone was inside? I stood still, listening. The house was silent, no footsteps, no movement, only the faint ticking of a clock from somewhere inside. After a moment, I slowly pushed the door open and stepped in. The smell hit me first. A strange mix of her perfume and something burnt, something chemical, sharp enough to sting my nose. "Alina!" My voice echoed through the empty space. The living room looked wrong. A chair lay on its side near the coffee table. A glass had shattered on the floor, its shards scattered like tiny crystals. Her favorite vase was missing from the shelf, leaving behind a clean circle of dust. I crouched down and picked up her phone from the carpet. It was cracked, the screen black but still warm to the touch. My chest tightened. I pressed the power button. It flickered to life, showing the last message she had sent. "Come quickly, I need to tell you something." I swallowed hard. The timestamp was 2:18 p.m. Less than an hour ago. Whatever happened had happened fast. I checked her call log, but most of the recent entries were just me and our parents. No strange numbers. Then I noticed something. A missed call from an unknown number at 2:25 p.m. Just 7 minutes after her last message. My mind raced. Was that the person she wanted to talk about? I walked toward the kitchen, my footsteps careful on the tiled floor. The smell grew stronger there, metallic and sharp. A pan sat on the stove, its contents burnt black. The fire had gone out, but the edge of the counter was still warm. She'd been cooking. That meant whatever interrupted her happened suddenly. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. "Alina, please, where are you?" I whispered, but the walls swallowed my voice. I went room by room, searching for any sign of her. The bedroom was untouched, her bed neatly made. The bathroom light was still on, the sink dripping slowly. I opened the closet, her clothes were there, her shoes lined up perfectly. It was like she'd just stepped out for a moment. When I returned to the living room, I noticed something I hadn't before. A small smear of something dark on the wall near the doorframe. I moved closer. It wasn't dust or paint. It looked like blood. My throat went dry. It wasn't much, just a thin line, but enough to send my mind spiraling. I forced myself to stay calm, to think logically. Maybe she cut herself, maybe she tripped. But the overturned chair, the broken glass, it didn't feel like an accident. Then, from outside I heard it, footsteps. Quick, uneven, coming closer. My body froze. I turned toward the door just as a woman's voice called out, breathless and panicked. "Don't go inside." A second later she appeared. The neighbor's housemaid, the one I'd seen before watering the plants across the street. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. She rushed toward me, her hands trembling. "You shouldn't be here," she cried. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused and alarmed. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Something terrible happened last night," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. "You have to leave. They might come back." Pulled my arm free. Who might come back? What happened to my sister? The maid looked around nervously, her gaze darting between the houses as if someone might be watching. I can't say here," she stammered. "But I heard her screaming. I heard them dragging her." My breath caught. "What are you talking about?" She took a step back, shaking her head violently. "Please just go. They know everything. If they see you here, they'll come after you too." Her fear was real. It radiated off her in waves. But her words made no sense. Who were they? Why would anyone hurt my sister? Before I could ask more, the maid flinched at the sound of a car passing and turned to run. "Wait!" I shouted, chasing after her. But she didn't stop. She sprinted down the street and disappeared around the corner. I stood there in the middle of the empty road, the air thick with confusion and fear. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I wanted to go after her, but I couldn't leave the house. Not yet. Not until I knew the truth. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I tried to steady my breathing. If what she said was true, then Alina had been taken. By someone dangerous, someone who didn't want to be found. But why? What could my sister possibly have done? I tried calling her phone again just in case. This time it didn't go to voicemail, it rang once, twice, and then I heard it. The ringtone. It was faint but coming from inside the house. Following the sound, I found it under the couch cushion. The screen lit up with my name, mocking me. I picked it up, holding it like it was a lifeline. She would never leave without her phone. Never. My body felt cold all over. I sat down on the floor, surrounded by the quiet chaos of the room, my mind racing through every memory, every detail of our last conversation. She'd sounded nervous last night, her voice trembling when she said, "There's something I have to tell you. It's about my neighbors." At the time I thought she was being dramatic. Alina always had a vivid imagination. But now, her words echoed in my mind like a warning. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch as the sun dipped lower outside. The air grew colder, heavier. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then stopped abruptly. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The maid's words came back to me, they might come back. I looked around, every creak and rustle suddenly magnified. I didn't know who they were, but one thing was certain. I wasn't leaving until I found out what had happened to my sister. And as I stood there, the quiet hum of fear pressing in on me, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever mystery had swallowed Alina wasn't just hiding in the dark. It was watching me from it. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat in my sister's living room for hours, the air heavy with silence, every creak of the wooden floor making me flinch. The faint smell of burnt food still lingered, mixing with the sharp, unsettling scent of fear that clung to the house. The police would have been the logical next step, but something deep inside me resisted. Maybe it was because of the maid's warning, or maybe because I knew how this would go. Another missing person report, another file lost in bureaucracy. Still, as dawn crept through the curtains, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to tell someone. The police station was barely awake when I got there. A tired-looking officer with a coffee mug in one hand and his phone in the other greeted me without looking up. "Missing person, you said," he mumbled, shuffling papers. "My sister," I said, trying to steady my voice. "She disappeared yesterday afternoon. There was a struggle in her house, and..." He finally looked at me, uninterested but mildly polite. "How long has she been gone?" "Less than 24 hours. He sighed, leaned back in his chair and said the words I dreaded. "You'll need to wait. We can't file a missing person report until 48 hours have passed. Maybe she went out of town or turned off her phone." I stared at him, disbelief rising like fire in my chest. "You think she went out of town and left her keys, her car and her phone? There's blood on her wall." The officer raised his brows slightly, still unconvinced. "We'll send someone to check the house, but don't jump to conclusions. People disappear for all sorts of reasons." I wanted to scream, but I bit my tongue, filled out the paperwork and left. My hands were shaking when I got into my car. My gut told me that waiting 48 hours could be the difference between finding her and losing her forever. I drove back to her street, watching the ordinary morning life unfold around me. Neighbors were watering plants, kids were leaving for school, and yet, no one seemed to notice that Alina's house stood silent. How could they not feel that something was wrong? I decided to find the maid. She was the only one who seemed to know anything. I crossed the road to the neighbor's house, a tall white building with a garden twice the size of my sister's. The same house the maid had come from yesterday. The door opened after several knocks, revealing a man in his 50s, dressed neatly but with tired eyes. "Yes. Good morning," I said. "I'm looking for your maid, the one who works here. I need to talk to her about something urgent." His expression changed instantly. Cautious, even slightly annoyed. "She doesn't work here anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked, surprised. "I saw her yesterday." I shrugged. "She left last night. Packed her things and vanished. Didn't even take her pay. Strange girl. Why do you need her?" "She told me something about my sister," I said, searching his face for any flicker of reaction. "She said something terrible happened." But he only frowned. "Your sister? I don't know anything about that. Maybe you should talk to the police." I forced a polite nod, thanked him and turned away. But before I did, I caught a glimpse of something odd through the slightly open door. A pair of muddy footprints trailing from the hallway toward the kitchen. The same size, the same shape, as the ones I'd seen in Alina's house near the back door. I pretended not to notice and left. As I walked away, my pulse pounded. The maid's sudden disappearance wasn't a coincidence. Either she'd run away in fear, or someone made sure she couldn't talk again. Back at Alina's house, I sat at her dining table and opened her laptop. It was password protected, but she and I had always shared everything. I tried a few of her usual combinations. Birthday, pet's name, our mother's name. None worked. I was about to give up when I remembered a quote she loved. "Truth is never quiet." I typed it in, and the screen unlocked. Her desktop was tidy, except for one folder on the corner named Neighbors. My heart raced. Opened it. Inside were several photos. Grainy, taken through curtains or from a distance. They showed two men I didn't recognize standing near the White House across the street. One looked middle-aged, in a black jacket. The other was younger, tall, wearing a cap that hid his face. Some of the photos had timestamps, late nights, early mornings. There were also notes. They come every 2 nights. Something in the garage. Big crates. Smells like chemicals. One woman came crying. Left with bruises. I scrolled further and found a voice recording dated 3 days ago. I hesitated, then pressed play. Alina's voice filled the room, shaky but determined. If something happens to me, check the neighbor's house. There's something there, something they're hiding. I think they know I've been watching them. The recording ended abruptly with a loud thud that I froze, staring at the screen. Every part of me wanted to deny it, to believe this was some misunderstanding, but the pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see. My sister hadn't just vanished. She had discovered something she wasn't supposed to. The sound of a car door slamming outside snapped me out of my thoughts. I looked through the window. A black sedan had pulled up across the street. 2 men stepped out, one of them wearing a black jacket. My stomach twisted. It was the same man from the photos. Without thinking, I closed the laptop and backed away from the window. My pulse roared in my ears. I heard voices outside, low, tense, like an argument. I couldn't make out the words, but I caught my sister's name. That was enough to send me moving. I grabbed my bag and slipped out the back door, running quietly through the narrow path that led to the street behind. My hands were cold despite the warm morning air. I ducked behind a fence and waited, watching through the gaps. The men stood in front of Alina's door, knocking once, then again harder. After a few seconds they exchanged a look, and one of them tried the handle. It didn't open. He muttered something angrily, then pulled out his phone and made a call. I couldn't hear the words, but his tone was sharp, impatient. A few minutes later they left, driving off in the same black sedan. I exhaled shakily, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Whoever those men were, they weren't random visitors. They were looking for something or someone. Maybe they knew I had her laptop. When I finally returned to the house, I locked every door and window. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, almost unrecognizable. I knew I couldn't stay there much longer, not until I figured out what was really going on. I copied all the files from her laptop onto my USB drive and decided to visit someone who might help. Detective Farid, an old family friend who'd left the police years ago but still knew how the system worked. He'd always told us, when something doesn't add up, it usually means someone wants it that way. Took me nearly an hour to reach his apartment downtown. He opened the door, surprised to see me. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't," I admitted, handing him the USB. "It's about Alina." As he plugged it into his computer, I told him everything. The strange message, the maid's warning, the photos, the men. His expression grew darker with every word. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but serious. "You need to leave her house for now. If those men are who I think they are, this isn't just about your sister." "What do you mean?" I asked, my throat tight. He clicked open one of the images. "I've seen this man before," he said quietly. "He's connected to a group that moves illegal materials, chemicals, drugs, sometimes worse. Your sister might have stumbled onto something big." I felt the room spin slightly. "Then what do we do?" He looked at me with steady eyes. "We find her before they do." I didn't know it then, but that moment marked the beginning of a dangerous trail, one that would lead to secrets buried beneath the quiet surface of that neighborhood, and to the truth my sister had risked everything to uncover. And as I left his apartment, clutching the USB like a lifeline, I realized the real danger wasn't that my sister had been taken. It was that whoever took her now knew I was looking. The drive back from Detective Farid's apartment felt longer than it should have. The city lights blurred past my windshield as my thoughts spun faster than the car's wheels. His words echoed in my head like a haunting refrain. Your sister might have stumbled onto something big. He had promised to pull a few strings, to check on recent reports involving that neighborhood, but I knew he was being cautious. The look in his eyes told me he believed this was dangerous and personal. When I reached Alina's house, The street was eerily quiet again. The same silence that had greeted me on the day I arrived. I parked a little farther away, not wanting to draw attention. The black sedan hadn't returned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Even the wind through the trees seemed to whisper warnings. Inside, I didn't bother turning on the main lights. I only lit the small lamp by the window and sat down at her desk with my notepad. I needed to think, to connect what I knew. The notes in her laptop mentioned the garage and crates. If she'd seen something being delivered or moved, maybe the neighbor's garage was where it all began. I stared at the house across the street. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn. A faint blue light flickered inside, maybe from a television. But the garage door was closed tight, and a padlock gleamed in the faint streetlight. My instincts told me that was where I'd find answers. It was close to midnight when I finally worked up the courage to step outside. I crossed the street quietly, every crunch of gravel beneath my shoes making my heart jump. The air was colder, sharper, as if the whole street had frozen in time. I reached the edge of their driveway and crouched behind a hedge. The house was still. No movement. Then I noticed a small side gate leading to the backyard. It was unlocked. I slipped inside, careful not to make a sound. The garden smelled faintly of damp soil and cleaning chemicals. Strange for a yard at this hour. The back door to the house was locked, but the garage's side door had a gap, just wide enough to see through. I leaned closer and peered inside. At first, it was too dark to see anything clearly. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I made out the shapes of several large crates stacked near the wall. Metal containers sealed shut, each marked with numbers and faded stickers that looked official. Too official. Near them was a workbench covered in tools, gloves, and a few vials filled with a clear liquid. I pulled out my phone and took a few pictures through the crack, my hands trembling slightly. That's when I saw it. A familiar object half hidden behind one of the crates. A small scarf, pink with embroidered flowers. My sister's. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to burst through the door to grab it, but I forced myself to stay calm. If Alina's scarf was here, it meant she'd been inside this garage. And that meant whoever owned this house knew exactly what had happened to her. I backed away slowly, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. But as I turned to leave, a faint sound froze me in place. A door creaking open. A step. Someone was coming. I darted behind a tree just as the back door opened. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket. His face was partially hidden in the shadows, but I recognized him instantly. The same man from Alina's photos. He carried a flashlight and scanned the yard. His movements slow and deliberate. I pressed myself against the trunk, barely breathing. The beam of his flashlight swept dangerously close to where I stood. He muttered something under his breath, then walked toward the gate, checking the lock. After a tense few seconds, he seemed satisfied and went back inside. When the door shut, I waited another full minute before daring to move. My legs were weak, but I forced myself to return to my car and drive away. I didn't stop until I was several blocks away. I parked near a small cafe that was closed for the night and sat there, shaking. Every nerve in my body was on edge, but at least I had proof now. Photos, the scarf, something real. I sent the pictures to Detective Farid, adding a short message. "You were right. She found something dangerous." He replied a few minutes later. "Stay away from that house until I get there. I'm calling in someone I trust." But I couldn't stay away. Not when my sister's scarf was sitting in that garage like a silent cry for help. The next morning I woke up early, still in my car. My neck ached but my mind was clear. I drove back to the neighborhood, this time parking farther down the road. I decided to talk to the other neighbors. Maybe someone had seen or heard something useful. The first house belonged to an elderly couple who had lived there for years. They remembered me from when I used to visit Alina. "She was such a nice girl," the old woman said softly, her wrinkled hands trembling as she poured me tea. "Always polite. But lately she looked worried." "Worried? Did she say why?" Yes. The woman nodded. A few nights ago, I saw her outside with her phone, taking pictures of that garage across the street. I asked her what she was doing and she told me to go inside, said it wasn't safe to be out late. I thought she was being paranoid. My chest tightened. Did you see anything else? Her husband spoke up this time. We heard shouting the night before she disappeared. Around midnight. A man's voice and then a car speeding away. We didn't think much of it until now. I thanked them and left, feeling both grateful and sick to my stomach. Everything was pointing to the same house, that cursed White House and the men who lived there. By the time I reached Alina's place again, Detective Farid's car was already parked outside. He looked tired but determined. I handed him my phone and showed him the photos. He frowned, zooming in on the crates. These markings, he said, belonged to a company that was shut down years ago for trafficking illegal materials. Whatever's inside those crates isn't meant to be there. So my sister found out about it. I asked quietly. He nodded. And they found out she knew. A cold wave of dread washed over me. Then she's still in danger. He looked at me, eyes sharp. Maybe. Or maybe she's the key to stopping them. Either way, we need evidence strong enough to bring them in. Before we could continue, there was a sudden knock at the door. We exchanged wary glances. Farid motioned for me to stay back as he opened it slightly. A young boy stood there, barely 12, holding an envelope. Someone told me to give this to you, he said nervously, then ran off before we could ask anything. Farid opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single piece of paper. Handwritten, shaky letters spelling out one chilling message. Stop looking for her, or you'll disappear too. The air in the room went still. Farid's jaw tightened. They know you're involved now, he said. We need to move fast. I stared at the note, my heart pounding. Someone out there was watching, threatening, manipulating, and my sister was still missing. But fear was no longer enough to stop me. If anything, it fueled me. That night, while Farid made calls and arranged surveillance, I sat by the window and looked at the house across the street again. The blue flicker of the television was still there, faint and haunting. I thought about the scarf, the blood, the maid who vanished, and the message that told me to stop. But I wasn't going to stop, because somewhere out there Alina was alive. I could feel it. And no matter who those men were or what they were hiding, I would uncover it, even if it meant stepping straight into the darkness she had tried to warn me about. As I switched off the light and stared into the cold, silent night, one truth settled in my mind like a storm cloud. This wasn't just about finding my sister anymore. It was about surviving long enough to tell the world what really hid behind those white walls. The next morning, my world had shrunk into a rhythm of fear, determination, and restless urgency. Every second felt like a countdown, every sound outside like a possible threat. Detective Farid had spent most of the night on the phone, calling his contacts, trying to dig up information about the men from the White House and the old company linked to those crates. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, but beneath it was something fiercer, the kind of focus only people who had seen too much danger could carry. They're connected to an old smuggling route, he said finally, rubbing his temples. The company was shut down 5 years ago, but its people went underground. They've been using houses and garages in residential areas to move things unnoticed. Your sister must have caught them in the act. I leaned against the wall, trying to absorb his words. So they kidnapped her to keep her quiet. He nodded grimly. Or worse. But we're not giving up yet. There's one address that keeps coming up in these reports. An abandoned warehouse near the lake. It was listed as one of their old storage sites. If Alina's alive, that's where they'll be keeping her. The words "if Alina's alive" hit me like a blow to the chest. I didn't want to imagine anything else. She had to be alive. She had to be waiting for me to find her. Farid gathered his equipment. A flashlight, a small camera, a gun he kept hidden under his jacket, and told me to stay behind. You've done enough, he said firmly. Let me handle this. But I couldn't just wait. I had already come too far, seen too much. She's my sister, I said, my voice trembling but steady. I'm coming with you. He hesitated, then sighed. Fine. But you stay behind me. No arguments. We drove in silence for nearly 40 minutes. The city gave way to open land, where the air grew colder and the streets emptier. The road curved toward the lake, glinting faintly under the gray morning sky. The warehouse stood at the edge of the water, a huge, rusted structure that looked half-eaten by time. The windows were shattered, and ivy crept up its walls like scars. We parked a short distance away, our car hidden behind a line of dead trees. Stay quiet, Farid whispered, loading his weapon. We don't know how many there are. My heart pounded so loudly I feared it would give us away. We crept toward the building, moving through the weeds that had overgrown the path. The closer we got, the stronger the smell of rust and oil became. There were faint tire tracks leading to a side entrance, recent ones. Someone had been here not long ago. Farid motioned for me to stay back as he pushed the metal door open just an inch. It groaned softly, echoing through the hollow space beyond. Inside, dim light filtered through cracks in the roof. The air was thick with dust and the faint hum of machinery. We stepped inside. The ground was littered with debris. Old tools, scraps of metal, broken crates. But near the center of the warehouse stood a newer set of containers, much like the ones in the neighbor's garage. They were stacked neatly, and next to them was a folding chair and a small table covered with papers. Farid moved toward the table, scanning the documents. I stayed near the entrance, my eyes darting across the shadows. Something about the stillness felt wrong, too deliberate. Then faintly I heard it. A sound so soft I almost missed it. A muffled cry. Did you hear that? I whispered. Farid froze. Where? I pointed toward a door at the far end of the warehouse. It was half open, a faint light spilling out from inside. We moved toward it carefully, the air growing colder with every step. As we reached the door, I felt my pulse quicken. Farid pushed it open slowly, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, and then I saw her, my sister. She was tied to a chair, her wrists bruised, her face pale but unmistakably alive. Her head jerked up when the light hit her, and for a moment, disbelief flashed across her eyes before she whispered, "No, it can't be you. Alina." I rushed forward, tears already burning my eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice was hoarse. Farid quickly untied her while I held her shaking hands. "It's okay," I whispered, my heart breaking at how fragile she looked. "You're safe now." But she shook her head violently. "No. You shouldn't have come. They'll come back. They always come back." Before I could ask what she meant, the sound of an engine echoed outside. Farid's head snapped toward the door. "Damn it," he muttered. "We're out of time." He motioned for us to move quickly. We slipped out through the side corridor, Alina leaning on me for support. The noise grew louder. Doors slamming, footsteps, voices shouting orders. The men were back. Farid took the lead, guiding us toward an emergency exit at the far end of the warehouse. The light outside was fading, the sky turning the color of ash. We were only a few meters from the door when a shout rang out behind us. "There! Stop them!" I turned just in time to see two men, the same ones from the White House, running toward us. One of them raised a gun. Farid fired back, the sound deafening in the confined space. The bullet hit the wall near them, and they ducked for cover. "Go!" Farid yelled. "Get her out!" I half-dragged, half-carried Alina through the door, stumbling into the cold air outside. The lake stretched out before us, dark and still, reflecting the gray sky like a mirror. Behind us, more gunshots cracked through the silence. I turned, terrified, but Farid waved us on, shouting something I couldn't hear. We ran through the tall grass, the sound of footsteps following close behind. My lungs burned, and Alina gasped for breath, but adrenaline pushed us forward. I could see the road ahead, if we could just make it to the car. Then I heard a sharp cry. I turned to see Alina stumble, falling hard onto the ground. I knelt beside her, panic clawing at my throat. "Come on, get up, we're almost there." But she was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. No, I can't, go without me. Never. I grabbed her arm, pulling her up. But before we could move, a voice rang out behind us, cold, commanding. Stop, or I'll shoot. Froze. The man in the black jacket stood a few feet away, gun aimed directly at me. His face was calm, his eyes glinting with something almost like amusement. You should have listened, he said quietly. She was supposed to stay quiet. Now you've made things complicated. Rage surged through me, washing away the fear. You hurt my sister, I said, my voice trembling. You destroyed her life. He shrugged. She saw what she wasn't supposed to see. That's how it works. For a moment time slowed. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of the lake. And then from behind him a sudden noise, a crack, a shout. Farid emerged from the shadows, gun raised. Before the man could react, a single shot rang out. He fell backward, the gun slipping from his hand. Farid ran to us, breathing heavily. Are you both okay? I nodded, though I could barely speak. Alina clung to me, sobbing quietly. We need to go, he said urgently. There might be more of them. We made it to the car just as sirens began to wail in the distance. Farid had already called for backup. As we drove away, I looked back at the warehouse, the place where I had found my sister, where everything had nearly ended. Alina was silent beside me, staring out the window with vacant eyes. I reached for her hand, and she squeezed it weakly. It's over now, I whispered, though part of me knew it wasn't. Because even as the warehouse disappeared from view, one thought refused to leave my mind. If this was just one of their storage sites, how many more were there? How deep did this network go? And what had my sister really discovered before they tried to silence her? The questions lingered, heavy and unspoken, as the sirens grew louder and the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The next few days passed in a blur of hospitals, police reports, and restless nights. Alina's physical wounds began to heal, but the fear in her eyes never left. Sometimes, when the hallway lights flickered at night, she would clutch my hand tightly, whispering, "They'll come for me again." I wanted to tell her it was over, that the men were caught, but I couldn't lie. Farid had informed me that while a few of the thugs from the warehouse were arrested, their leader, the man behind everything, was still missing. His name was Raymond Tarek, a businessman turned smuggler who had used shell companies to move stolen goods, drugs, and sometimes even people. The police believed he had slipped out of the city before they raided the warehouse. It should have been a moment of victory, but all I felt was exhaustion and dread. Alina's life had been ripped apart. Her home was now a crime scene, her job suspended, her neighbors terrified. The woman who had once been so strong, so full of life, now sat in silence for hours, staring at the walls as if afraid they might start whispering again. I spent every moment by her side. Every time she closed her eyes, I feared she might vanish again. But even as I tried to comfort her, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. On the third day, Farid came to visit. He looked worn out, his shirt crumpled, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. We traced one of Tarek's contacts, he said quietly, pulling a chair beside me. There's an old farmhouse outside the city. His men have been spotted there. We think Tarek's hiding inside. Alina stirred slightly, listening without looking up. Her voice was faint but steady. You'll never catch him. He's always one step ahead. That's what he told me when they brought me to the warehouse. Farid frowned. He spoke to you. She nodded slowly. He said, I wasn't supposed to see what was in those crates. That I'd seen something that could ruin him. But I didn't even know what it was. I just saw numbers, codes maybe, on the containers. He said I had made a mistake by noticing. Farid exchanged a glance with me. Those codes could be his route map. If we can find the link, we can take him down for good. I couldn't stand it anymore. Then let's go. Let's end this. He hesitated. You've done enough. You almost died last time. I looked at Alina. Her fragile frame, the faint bruises on her wrists, the distant look in her eyes. He destroyed her life, I said quietly. He'll keep doing this unless someone stops him. I'm going. Farid studied me for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Fine. But this time we do it my way. That night we drove out of the city again, the streets empty and the air heavy with anticipation. The road to the farmhouse twisted through patches of fog and fields that seemed to stretch forever. The moon hung low, pale and silent, casting everything in silver shadows. When we finally saw the house, it looked almost peaceful, an old two-story structure with faded paint and a porch that sagged under its own weight. But the faint glow of light through one of the windows told a different story. Farid parked behind a cluster of trees. "Stay here until I signal," he said, loading his weapon. But as we approached the building, something in me tightened. The silence felt wrong. Too still. Too expectant. Then a voice came from the darkness. "You shouldn't have come back." I spun around. Tariq stepped out from the shadows, his face half lit by the moon. He looked older than I expected. Gray at the temples, lines carved deep around his mouth, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Farid raised his gun. "Raymond Tariq, you're under arrest." Tariq chuckled, unbothered. "Detective Farid. Always so righteous. You think this is going to end with handcuffs? Well, you'll be buried here, both of you." Suddenly, men emerged from the darkness. 3, maybe 4, armed and silent. The air filled with the metallic click of weapons being drawn. Farid fired first, hitting one of them square in the shoulder. Chaos erupted. I ducked behind a wall as bullets tore through the night. Dust and splinters flew into my eyes, choking me. Farid yelled for me to stay down, but I could barely hear him. I crawled toward the back of the house, heart hammering. Through a broken window, I saw Tariq slipping inside, heading for a staircase. Without thinking, I followed. The inside of the house smelled like old wood and smoke. The floor creaked under my steps as I climbed after him. On the upper floor, the hallway was dark except for the dim light from an open door. I heard him talking, his voice calm, almost casual, as he rummaged through papers. "You people never learn," he said, not looking up. "Do you know how many have tried to stop me? You think this ends because one frightened woman saw a few crates?" He turned then, eyes glinting. "You're her sister, aren't you? You have her eyes. Same foolish bravery." I felt anger surge through me, sharp and cold. "You tortured her. You think you can just walk away?" He smiled faintly. "I always do." Before he could move, I lunged forward, grabbing the nearest thing I could, a broken lamp from the floor, and swung. It connected with his arm, sending the gun in his hand skidding across the floor. He roared, shoving me backward, but I didn't stop. The rage I had buried for days exploded out of me. We struggled, crashing into furniture, the noise echoing through the house. He was stronger, but desperation gave me speed. I kicked hard, catching him off balance. He stumbled against the window, glass cracking behind him. Then a gunshot rang out. For a heartbeat I froze, expecting pain, expecting darkness, but it wasn't me. Tariq's eyes went wide as he staggered, clutching his chest. Behind him, Farid stood in the doorway, his face grim and steady. "It's over," Farid said quietly. Tariq sank to the floor, his breath rattling once, twice, and then nothing. Silence filled the room again, thick, unreal, heavy. My hands trembled as I sank down beside the wall. Farid checked for a pulse, then looked at me. "He's done. It's finished." Outside, the sound of sirens approached. Backup had finally arrived. I closed my eyes, letting out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for weeks. When morning came, the farmhouse was crawling with police. They uncovered files, coded documents, and drives linking Tariq's operations to smuggling routes across multiple cities. His empire, once untouchable, was finally collapsing. Back at the hospital, I sat beside Alina's bed again. She was stronger now, her eyes clearer. When I told her what had happened, she stared at me for a long moment, tears glistening. You shouldn't have gone, she whispered. I had to, I said softly. You would have done the same for me. She smiled faintly then, the first real smile since I'd found her. Maybe. But promise me one thing, no more chasing monsters. Let the world be quiet for a while. I nodded, though deep down, I knew that quiet wouldn't come easily. Some nights I still saw that warehouse, heard the echo of her screams, smelled the dust and fear. But every time I looked at her, alive, breathing, healing, I reminded myself it had been worth it. Farid visited us one last time before the case was officially closed. You did good, he said. Most people would have walked away. I couldn't, I replied. Family doesn't let go. He smiled faintly, tipping his hat before leaving. And just like that, the chapter closed. Weeks later, Alina and I returned to her house. It was quieter now, the walls repaired, the neighbors avoiding eye contact as we walked past. The air felt lighter somehow, though a trace of the past lingered in every corner. As we stood in her garden that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky, she reached for my hand. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up on me. I squeezed her hand gently. You'd have done the same. And for the first time since that terrifying day when I arrived to find her missing, I felt a strange, peaceful stillness settle in my chest. The storm had passed. The shadows were finally lifting. But as the last light faded and the street grew quiet, a single thought lingered at the back of my mind. A reminder, soft but certain. Evil doesn't disappear. It only hides until someone dares to face it again. And I knew if it ever returned, I would be ready. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Twisted Fate Chronicle for more thrilling and emotional story twists every week.